So in this video, we get our first look at qualitative analysis.
I'm mapping basic topics of conversation.
Completely different pictures.
So, qualitative analysis, specifically thematic analysis, which is the type of analysis we'll be looking at. Here's basically what it is. You usually start off with a transcript from, say, a qualitative interview. The one we're using is one taken from an interview between two academic members of staff talking about the issue of student stress, specifically among psychology undergraduate students. And you read that transcript and you read it again and again and again, and you keep reading it again and again to properly familiarise yourself with it, to immerse yourself in that interview. This is called, unsurprisingly, familiarization. And as you do that, you'll start to note particular phrases that strike you as particularly important. Now, how do you know when a phrase is important? Well, there are no strict rules or procedures here. You'll find that in qualitative methods. There are no strict rules or procedures. It's not like quantitative methods where there often are those strict rules and procedures that you need to follow. We don't really have those sorts of things. We have strategies and guidelines, things that kind of point you in a particular direction, say, well, kind of do it like that, but it doesn't tell you exactly how to do it. It can be frustrating when you realize that in qualitative methods, but it's actually quite liberating as well. Okay, so what I'll give you are three good strategies for deciding which bits of your transcript are important. Hello? What was that? Okay, so hopefully the text will come up here. So look for things that have implications. The, oh gosh, that would change how we do things if that were true type of response. Second, look for things that surprise you. The, oh, I hadn't thought of that type of response. And finally, look for things that intrigue you. The, oh, I wonder what that means response. I'm going to turn my phone off. I should have done that. Right. Do not disturb. Do not disturb me. Thank you. Okay. The third one of those strategies is a good one for planning more research, or as is often the case with qualitative research, to reshape your method, in particular change your interview questions, so that in your next interview, whether that be with the same participant who you invite back over for a second interview or with a new participant, you have this new question. The question is, what does this thing mean? Type question. That thing that you found in the transcript that intrigued you, you ask a question about it. So these three strategies, they're all based on your own personal response to the transcript, the response that's based on your own understanding, your own experiences, your own beliefs, your own values, and so on. And all of this is the thing we call subjectivity. And the trick is not to look for things in the transcript that you find familiar or that you agree with. That would be using subjectivity, but using it in the wrong way. That would be seeking to confirm something you either already know or a way of thinking that you're already thinking. That would be a deductive process, and qualitative research uses an inductive process. So let's talk about the difference between a deductive and an inductive process of inquiry.
We're on a mapping survey near the Cardassia sector.
So a deductive process of inquiry is where you have a theory, an idea of how something works, and then you look at your data and you see if your theory is a good one or not. Actually, you collect data specifically with the purpose of testing out whether your theory or your idea is a good one. That's what we call hypothesis testing. And in qualitative research, we use an inductive process. Here, you don't have an idea that you want to test to see if it's good or not. Instead, you start off with collecting your data and you develop your ideas from the data. So let's get back to that reading of the transcript and seeking out those alternative ways of thinking, looking for those surprises, looking for those things that we don't understand. This is the process we call coding and developing themes.
Oh, why must I feed him straight lines?
What we're doing here is we're looking for our personal response to the transcript. And the strongest responses tend to come when we engage both intellectually and emotionally with the text, when we use more than one of our senses. Specifically, we want to fire up our imagination so that we can visualize the thing we're thinking about. The words kind of come alive. They stir up memories and images of events, either fictitious or real. This is when we start drawing on metaphors and similes. That thing when we say, oh, this is a bit like a balloon, or it's a bit like a fluffy cloud. You use your imagination and you think about things that are like the thing that's being talked about in the transcript. And here you see how analysis is a process about being curious, looking for those things that are different, looking for those surprises, those things that intrigue you, and then creating images, employing your creativity to represent those things. And here, images start to replace the words in the transcript. This is the process of coding. Everyone does this differently. Everyone does this in their own way, but the key is using your imagination. And when you feel you're confident that your code nicely sums up the meaning in the transcript, that it is authentic, it captures what was said, and it's relatable and coherent, i.e. others would readily be able to understand your code and how it represents what was said in the interview, then you can relabel that code a theme. If you don't have that much confidence in your code in that way, you need to just carry on coding and rethinking your coding to find something that you feel happier with. So, in the transcript that we're working on, when the participant referred to a hurdle and then talked about a pressure point, I imagine someone running into a hurdle on an athletics racetrack and being unable to jump it, instead having to push it over. And then when it came to the point in the transcript just after the pressure point comment, there was this comment about having to do well in assignments. And that kind of sat with this idea of pushing, someone feeling they had to push themselves to perform well. But I wasn't quite happy with that, because a different image came to mind that was different from that hurdle idea, where it was less about the hurdle, more about the race. It was something about how competitive it was. It was the content in the transcript that was about the pressure to get into the psychology honours programme. And I picked up that content because I'd gone through the process of familiarising myself with the transcript, and I knew it was there in the transcript because I'd read it many times. I knew where this conversation was going, and so I came up with this second coding, which was competition. But I was still never that comfortable with the code push, and I wasn't ready to label it as a theme because that one needed just a bit more explanation. I just imagined telling someone else that I'd come up with this theme of push and imagining how little sense it might make to them. What do you mean push? What's push about? I just think it didn't quite make sense. I had to do a little bit of work explaining it to someone. But also, once I'd moved that doing well quote away from that code and into this new code of competition, that code push seemed to be actually more about the hurdle than someone running into the hurdle. And that's where the code obstacle came up. A hurdle is a kind of obstacle. It's like a obstacle. It's like an obstacle. I use that simile. And it's at that point where I felt, yep, that works. That's a possible theme. And it became a theme because it started to represent more of the data, and I found less and less reason to be unhappy with it. You get to that feeling of, well, yep, this sums it up. I think it's going to make sense to someone other than me, and it captures what was said.
Completely different pictures.
Now, two things here. First, you'll notice that subjectivity is not something that's being controlled, not something that's being worried over as being negative and that we need to eliminate. But it's being seen as an asset. It's integral to the analysis. It's a good thing because it's the thing we're using to make sense of the data. And that's what analysis is. It's sense-making. drawing on your experiences, your values, your beliefs, and so on, to make sense of the data. It's the thing in particular that you need to use to find those surprises in the transcript, that unsettle your pre-existing way of thinking about things. It's the thing that feeds your imagination, that sparks your creativity when you feed off your own memories and start visualizing things in a particular way. So subjectivity is important to draw on. We need to draw on it in our analysis, but we also need to make it transparent. We need to say, what is it about our experience, our assumptions and prior learning, and our beliefs, our values, and so on, that drew us to the particular things in the transcript, that caused us surprise or intrigued us or made us think, whoa, this is going to change things. And we need to make that transparent. We need to reflect on our subjectivity. We do that in level 3. In the level 3 unit, you'll be writing about your subjective engagement with analysis. You don't need to do that for this level, for this unit. You don't need to write about your subjectivity, but you do need to get your head around how subjectivity is a good thing, not a bad thing. Because if you don't use your subjectivity, if you try to remain objective when you're doing the analysis, your imagination's not going to fire up. Your visualizations will probably end up a bit sterile because you're not feeding them with actual memories that you have and thoughts and feelings that you actually have. And your map is probably going to look a bit grey and bland and a bit pants. Okay? So, subjectivity is a good thing. But the key thing to remember is that you want to engage with your own thoughts and feelings, but you don't want to get stuck in your own head. You do need to communicate your analysis to others. So it's your own subjectivity that drives the analysis, the things that you find interesting and important, but it's your understanding of shared subjectivity that informs how you communicate that analysis to others. Now, we actually engage in shared subjectivity all of the time. With writing, we have grammar and syntax, which is a shared understanding of what certain words mean and how putting particular words together in particular ways will be similarly understood by others, that it will convey a shared meaning. But for the mapping component of Assessment 1, you aren't only using words. Actually, you're going to use very few words. You only write down the names of the themes. We're giving you the names of the themes, and you just write them down in your diagram. But apart from that, there's going to be no other words in your diagram, your illustration, your map. You're going to be using visuals to convey the meaning of those themes. And that's where you'll be using a visual language.
There'll be no straight lines.
Storyboard I drew from Monsters University. You can see how I made Mike dominate the frame by putting him in the foreground close to camera. Mike is coming into his own as a scare coach, and I made him the biggest thing in frame because he's the strongest character in this moment, stronger than Sully. We can communicate so many things using only visual language.
We all have a visual language and we share a visual language, but you may not have had the opportunity to engage with that shared visual language with much thought in your psychology degree, at least in relation to your assessments. In this unit, for Assessment 1, you do need to engage with that shared visual language. You need to produce an argument that looks good rather than sounds good. And understanding visual language is especially important for qualitative interviews, particularly online interviewing, which more and more researchers are using these days, largely because of the pandemic, but also because of the great access people have to video conferencing equipment. At level 3, when you'll be conducting an online interview, you'll learn that camera angles convey a particular aesthetic and a particular meaning. So having your laptop on your lap means your camera's pointing up at you, and a low camera angle conveys meaning related to power. It tells the person you're talking to that you consider yourself more powerful than them and more important than them. And that's not a good thing to communicate to a participant, okay, unless you're interrogating them. So it's not a good look, and it's unintended. The meaning is subtle, but it's there, and a lot of qualitative interviews screw that bit of their interview up because they're not thinking about using a shared visual language. They are using a shared visual language, they just don't realize it. For us at level 2, for this unit, visual language becomes important through the choice of images you use for your mapping, and both the meaning embedded in those images and the way those images are assembled on the page. And that's what we mean by your skill in mapping your analysis, your skill in using visual representation of the themes. Now, don't worry, I'm going to give you a visual language to use, and I'm going to do that through talking to you about some of the mapping tools you can use for Assessment 1. And we'll talk about that in our next video. So till then, ta-da.